Okay, perfect. So today I want to talk about the 7 factors to picking the best location for investing in commercial real estate. And apologize for last week. I was traveling and I got a cold and I basically, excuse me, lost my voice. So I've got it back for the most part. And I'm really looking forward to today because it was, I put a lot of energy and effort into this presentation. And we're going to get into how to pick the location because I think that that's really where most people start. So if you don't know me, Shane Melanson with the Investing Advantage podcast. And look at that. Got to shut off my phone. Sorry. The Investing Advantage podcast. So today what I want to talk about is how to pick the right location when you invest in commercial real estate. And this kind of came about a few different reasons for today's show, if you will. And first was I was having lunch downtown, excuse me, and I noticed that a friend of mine has a for lease sign up on his retail property. And this particular property, it's a crappy little building, but it's in a great location. It's I don't want to give away too much information because my friend may watch this, and I don't want to say too many kind of negative things about his property per se. But I'll tell you the good and the bad. So the good about this individual's property is it is in the path of progression, meaning all around him there are big developers, meaning smart money, that are coming into the area and investing and looking at either redeveloping, tearing down old properties and going vertical because it's a inner city location. The challenges with his site is, number one, there's a laneway that separates his site from where the development is going on, which means that that site really is only going to benefit from the site that is to the south. And what that really means is because he's mid-block, he is constrained by the corner site, which really now controls his destiny. Because even though he's going to potentially redevelop, which I thought was kind of interesting, and I haven't seen the plan, so maybe there's something kind of cool he's able to do there. But the site is small, it's mid-block, his access is going to be tight, and I think that because he's patient and commercial real estate investing is a long-term play, he'll do okay. However, if it was me, I would not have bought that site unless I controlled the corner site. And so we're going to get into the specifics of that, but I thought if I started off with kind of a quick story, in fact, I posted on Instagram a little while ago, and I think some of the pictures were on my website as well, where I showed the building to the north and the building to the south, and then you can kind of see his little building in between. And anyways, you can kind of see some of the thoughts. So in any event, I'm sure that if I hear from my buddy, I'll find out what his plans are, and maybe he's able to do something that I'm not aware of. So today I want to talk about location. And I think what happens is a lot of people believe that everything in commercial real estate is location. And while that is true to some degree, because you really can't change your location, what I would also say is the timing and the property itself are also very important. So it's hard to say that location in and of itself is the most important factor. Now, we're not going to get into timing because that will be a separate topic that we'll go into on a different podcast and video. But the property itself, that is also a separate conversation. I really want to go deep on location, and specifically, I want to talk about retail properties. I know a lot of listeners and people watching this are going to be possibly multifamily investors. And if that's the case, I'll give you kind of a quick checklist there. But really, I think because retail has got such a negative rap over the last little while, I thought that I would do a specific show on that. So if we if we kind of back up and think about kind of some of the principles of how I invest, I thought that I should maybe start by saying, the kind of big idea for this show is that when you're investing, you're looking for unfair advantages. And the three advantages that an investor can have are behavioral, analytical, and informational. And when I say behavioral, what I'm really talking about is basically where there's large numbers of people that act in predictable ways in response to a specified event. And so if you think about when Warren Buffett says, be greedy when others are fearful and fearful when others are greedy, he's really talking about a behavioral advantage that he has. The second would be analytical. So where you place a different amount or significance or importance on information that everyone else has. So essentially what you're doing is you're seeing something others don't. And then the last is informational. And that's when you have something material that others don't. And in commercial real estate, the reason I like it so much is you're able to leverage all three of these, but specifically informational and analytical, which are very difficult. Most people go to jail if you've got informational advantages, say, in the stock market, because the idea is the stock market is supposed to be public knowledge to everyone. So I just want to frame the conversation by saying with the behavioral, analytical, and informational advantages of commercial real estate, you'll see how this ties directly into picking the right location. So, just want to look at quick. Okay, so I think we've already talked about a lot of the framing that I wanted to get into, but I want to go into, just because we're buying in a great area. Okay, so here what I'm thinking is I should probably get into some of the problems that I see new investors struggling with as it relates to investing in commercial real estate. And the first problem is, where do they start to look? What city, what neighborhood? I find that because there's so many opportunities that new investors and even sophisticated investors, they hear about a hot market. It's generally not where they live. And so they either feel that they've missed the opportunity or that they need to move in order to make money. And this is kind of like a grass is greener mentality, where you start to look at markets that you really don't have a lot of knowledge on or experience. And if you think about what I had just talked about in terms of having that behavioral, analytical, or informational advantage, then you want to be investing, or at least starting to invest, in areas that you have informational advantages. And because commercial real estate is an imperfect market and the information is very, it's not readily available. It really requires someone to understand a market in detail in order to have that kind of advantage. And so for me, being in Calgary, I know the areas that are growing. I know the areas that I want to stay away from. But when I go into Houston, which I am right now, or Dallas or Austin, then what I'm really looking for is someone in those local markets, even though I have a very good understanding because I've been there, not 100 times, but probably 50 or 60 times, and specifically to look at commercial real estate. So I know more than the average person. However, if I'm competing with a guy that's lived and invested in this area for 25 years, it's unrealistic for me to think that I'm going to have an advantage over them. So what I need to do is in my opinion, I need to align with someone that is an expert there. But the reason I'm doing that is because I've been investing for 15 years, 10 years in commercial real estate. And so I feel that I've got the ability to go into new markets. However, I still focus very close to home because that is where I have an advantage over a lot of different investors. So problem one, where do you start looking? Problem two is looking at too many properties and looking at everything. Commercial real estate it's massive. And so you could be looking at apartments, retail, office, land, industrial. I'm going to suggest that you want to focus and master one asset class to begin with. Problem 3 is, how do you get started? What's the first step? And I see that this is a big issue for investors because they don't have a clear understanding on how to target a location. And so what happens is they end up confused and overwhelmed. Without a plan, they end up spinning their wheels and wasting a lot of time. And I know when I was looking in Houston, when I first started, I was looking at office buildings, and I went down, I don't know, probably 10 to 15 times. And these would be like three days to up to 6 or 7 days. And I want to say that I probably invested anywhere from $35,000 to $45,000 in travel. And I was looking at office buildings that I really didn't understand. And eventually what I determined was that I was going to take a separate trip without the group of guys that I was looking at properties with, and go down and look specifically at multifamily, because that's what I understood. And I went down with a very specific plan, a very specific location in Houston, Sugarland. And from that one trip, we were able to identify 2 properties and closed on one, which was 240 units. So that gives you an idea that 18 months of spinning my wheels. Now, of course, I was getting an education on the market and who the locals were, but it wasn't until I had a very kind of specified plan of action that I was able to kind of execute and eventually make money. So, and I think of those problems, really what happens is new investors are paralyzed with fear that they will end up buying in the wrong location. And it is true that you can't change your property's location. If you end up buying in the wrong location, you could get stuck with a property that no one wants. And what I would say is, I feel, or I've experienced and seen this, I've done it myself, that this mistake is made most often when markets are hot. When everything is selling and it's hard to find deals, you end up forcing an opportunity. You buy in a location that if you had the time and patience, you might not do. But because the market's hot, you just want to get your money out and you want to take advantage of it. So that is a real challenge that I see. And I think that what I'll do now is I'm going to transition into how to avoid these problems. And the first would be getting clarity on where to look. And so today what I'm going to do is I'm going to get you like crystal clear on where you should start investing in commercial real estate. And obviously there's kind of criteria that you're going to have to answer for yourself, but it's really, how much time do you have? How much money do you have? How much energy and how much experience? So filter all of these kind of location parameters through that lens. Number 2 is having a plan. And I'm going to give you a simple plan towards the end of today's podcast and video here. And really, you're going to get kind of a step-by-step in terms of kind of, I'll break it down into kind of like the 3 major steps that I would do and what I follow for myself and what I teach my clients in terms of how to pick a location. And then number 3 is confidence. And what I think, where I think confidence comes from is it comes from clarity and it comes from having a plan. And without that confidence, I think what ends up happening is new investors and even seasoned investors, because I go through waves myself where my confidence gets beaten up. But I think really what's important is to have like fundamental values and principles, checklists, tools that you can use. And I'm also going to tell you about a commercial real estate scorecard that I use. It's only a couple of pages, but it gives me confidence when I'm looking at a property. I can run that property through that checklist or scorecard, and it's extremely helpful in terms of just making sure that I'm focused on the right properties. Because sometimes you can get you can get enamored by a property that you think would be a great opportunity. However, when you dig into it, you realize that it's probably a pass. So today, my ultimate goal for you is to really embrace the idea of becoming an expert in your market. So I believe that if you follow what I'm going to show you, and I'm not going to say that it is easy, it is somewhat simple. Generally, the work that's involved is not complex, although it does take a bit of time. And what I would suggest is that that's a good thing, because the more time that it takes to understand and master your market, just realize that that is a barrier to entry for other new investors coming in. And so for me, I view that as a positive. For other people that are looking for kind of a quick fix, then obviously that would be a deterrent. But like I said, because I'm in this for the long term, I actually prefer that. So becoming a master or a market expert, what you're going to kind of get out of that is when you understand the properties in your area so well, you're going to be able to see an opportunity before others do. You're going to have the confidence to be able to pull the trigger. You're going to know the area, the comparables, the rents, the new developments, what's happening in the future of that area. And this is all going to give you those informational and analytical unfair advantages where you're able to take advantage of that and profit. Okay, so that's the idea. Kind of a quick story. This is going back not that long ago, maybe 2 years ago. My partner and I helped a client who was a very sophisticated investor. They came to us and said, guys, we want to be on this specific street in Calgary. Like they basically gave us kind of like a 3-block radius that they wanted to be in. And essentially what we did is we pulled title, meaning we found out who the owners were. And then we made appointments and connected with the owners to find out who would be interested in selling their properties. One of the groups, one of the owners, if you will, there were a couple. And fortunately, now it didn't happen overnight. It took about 6 months because initially when we contacted them, they had no interest in selling. But what you'll find in commercial real estate is people's circumstances changes, and you can never predict when that when a change is going to happen. And for various reasons, they contacted us back and said, you know what, we're ready to sell. And we had a willing buyer and a willing seller in an incredible location. And I can tell you that property is going to be, I don't know exactly what the profit potential is, but it will be in the millions, certainly, because the group that's buying it knows how to maximize the opportunity there. And they were very specific in terms of where they wanted to look. And I can tell you that if they wanted to sell it, they'd have a lineup of buyers right now. So that is the power of understanding location extremely well, having that kind of informational and analytical advantage, if you will. So how do you get to that? Well, there are a few questions in terms of like, what are the best location factors? And I will say that obviously every city is different. Every property is going to be different. So what I thought I should do is maybe I'm going to start with a macro, and then we're going to go narrow, and then we'll come back out. And so that is kind of the format for today's, like as we get into the details of this. So ideally what I'd like is, if you're considering investing, you should be looking in kind of like a 3 to maybe 10-mile radius, depending on where you live and work. And what I would say is, even if all you do is get experience understanding the market that you're in, you'll be able to transition and take that information, if you will, and apply it to any market that you go into. But if you try to start, in my opinion, and going into a brand new market that you're going to have to travel to constantly, you'll just become frustrated, overwhelmed, and generally you won't stick with it. That's been my experience. I'm not suggesting that you won't. However, it may be a better first step to start investing and looking in your backyard. Some of the things that I would really focus on: rental rates. I would focus on construction costs. I would look at land values. I'd look at who are the major players. I'd look at who the brokers are, who the owners are. And I would suggest to start looking in areas that are A, B, possibly C, that maybe C areas that are bordering on a B area. And I know that we've talked about A, B, C, D areas. Just think of A areas as kind of the most affluent, D areas as war zones. You want to be in the A and B primarily. C is kind of working class. And so these are just my thoughts. So if you want, I know there's people that make tremendous amounts of money in D areas. It's just not for me. So now, one other big idea, if you will, is, and this kind of is a shortcut. And what I tell people is, if you don't know anything about locations, follow the smart money. And so back to the gentleman that I had mentioned in the story initially, he's following the smart money. He is looking at the developer next to him is First Cap, and they are, I want to say, $8 to $10 billion retail developer in Canada. And they know what they're doing. They've got a huge team and staff that focus on the best areas to invest in. And so if you know nothing else, you could just follow the smart money, and that would help you probably bypass about 80% of opportunities that when you look around and you don't see any smart money, then you're pioneering. And unless you're a sophisticated investor that knows something other people don't, then you may want to really think that through. The other way to kind of follow the smart money is looking at, especially if you're trying to figure out what a location is, whether it's an A, B, or C, is there a Starbucks or a Whole Foods? That's probably going to be an A or B area. If you're looking at like pawn shops or lots of industrial, you're probably going into C and D areas. Okay, so that is kind of a hack or kind of a quick strategy to streamline your locations. But we're going to get into very specifics here in a second. So I'll give you, I'd mentioned that I would do this, and I'm not going to get into details on it, but I'll give you the 5 location factors that I feel are key for multifamily, only because I feel that there's enough people watching and listening that are multifamily investors. But like I said, we're going to go deep in retail. Now, before I get into this, what you're gonna notice is there's a lot of overlap between good location factors for an apartment building or a retail property. So first, close to jobs. Second, near transportation or infrastructure. So you're really looking for rapid transit trains. I was in Toronto recently, and you can just basically look up and down the GO line in Toronto, and you can see all the new towers going up and down there. Once again, following smart money. Where does the smart money go? They're looking at transportation and infrastructure. Number 3, amenities. Grocery stores, recreation, gyms, if it's got views, restaurants, all those type of things can really impact the desirability of an apartment building. Proximity to schools, fire stations, police, churches, access and visibility. Are you on a corner site versus an interior site or mid-block? Are you on a cul-de-sac? All those things have an impact. And just to quickly explain that, for an apartment building, for example, if you're on a corner site, generally you're going to have 2 access points, which is more desirable than mid-block where you've only got usually 1 access point. Okay. And a few negative impacts that you want to kind of be mindful of. Are you close to a landfill? Are you near a waste treatment? Are you close to heavy industrial? Maybe an airport, rail, mining, waste transfer, congested traffic, which kind of increases the noise and sound that people are not necessarily keen to live next to. So those are kind of quick multifamily location factors. But like I mentioned, I want to get into retail today. And we are going to, first, when I use the word retail, I think most people probably get what I'm talking about, but I thought I should maybe define what a retail property is. So that way we're very clear that I'm not talking about offices. I'm not talking about warehouses. What I'm talking about are retail sites that can either be a freestanding building like a McDonald's or a Starbucks, or a shopping center. And the Urban Land Institute defines retail properties as a group of commercial establishments planned, developed, owned, and managed as a unit related in location, size, type of shops to the trade area it serves, and provides on-site parking related to the types and sizes of its stores. So, I mean, that's kind of a wordy explanation of what a retail property is, but I think, you know, I think that gives it more context. And the Urban Land Institute, ULI, has 8 key factors that they look at for a retail property. They're looking for a unified look. They want it to be a unified site. They want it to be easily accessible. They want sufficient on-site parking, the ability to deliver services. So think of loading. You're going to have site improvements like landscaping, lighting, signage. You want a synergistic tenant mix, meaning the tenants all kind of work together. You want, and finally, comfortable surroundings. So those are kind of like 8 factors to kind of successful retail developers, and that should give you some perspective on the type of retail properties that we're going to start talking about here shortly. Now, I don't want to get into all the different types of retail properties because they can range anywhere from kind of 2,000 or 3,000 square feet up to like power centers that are millions of square feet. But excuse me. But if you go on to ICSC, which is the basically it's the my name's drawing a blank. Essentially, it's where all the retail developers come to for information, and it is I think it's the International Council of Shopping Centers, and they have a definition of what a neighborhood shopping center is, what a community center is, what a regional, super regional, what a fashion center would be, a power center, or an outlet center. Like I said, they range, and so I would imagine most new investors coming in are going to be looking at neighborhood centers and community centers, anywhere from kind of 2,000 to 3,000 square feet up to maybe 50,000 square feet. And now, when I look at a retail center, I start by focusing on the demand side of the equation. And what do I mean by the demand side? Really what I'm talking about is demand rising or is it falling where I live? And there's kind of 4 areas that I will look at. I'll look at population growth, I'll look at demographic changes, I'll look at job opportunities, and I'll look at the income and spending in those areas. Once I understand the demand, now what I start to do is I start to look at specific sites. And there's really like 7 criteria for determining a retail location. How many people live there, and what's their disposable income? Okay, so that's number 1. Number 2, what are the excuse me. What are the minimal sales per square foot? That's going to vary depending on the retailer, but suffice to say, what you're looking for is higher volume of sales per square foot. What's the competition in the area? How easy is it to access this particular location? Ideally, you want to be at an intersection of 2 major roads, but there are different terms. And so you can have right in, right out, which is less desirable than a controlled intersection, which allows for all turns. We had a tenant recently that was going to give us a bonus on rent if we could get access directly off a major road instead of having to go up to the intersection, come around, and come into the property. But those are considerations whenever you're looking at a retail property. You want to consider traffic count and visibility. Most of this information is going to be available online on the city wherever you're looking to invest in. You can just type in, for example, Calgary traffic counts, and the city of Calgary has that. Next, you're looking at density. And what I'm talking about on density is you want to make sure that the property that you're looking at has sufficient parking and configuration. So I'll give you a quick example. If you're looking at medical, you're looking at probably 5 parking stalls per 1,000 square feet, or maybe north of that. Most retail, you kind of want in that four stalls per 1,000. That's kind of a rule of thumb, if you will, that that you can kind of quickly assess to ensure that you've got enough parking. So if it's a 10,000 square foot retail property, you're looking for about 40 parking stalls. And in terms of density, what I would suggest is most retail sites are anywhere from kind of in that 18 to 24% site coverage. And so what that really is talking about is take the total square footage of the retail that you've got and then divide that by the entire land. And so if you've got 10,000 square feet of retail on 40,000 square feet of land, which is just under an acre, you're looking at about 25% site coverage. Okay, so that's kind of a quick rule of thumb there. And then the last one is just making sure that you've got the right zoning for the type of retail uses that you're looking for. I'm currently in the process of likely having to rezone a property because the demand for the type of retail tenants that want to be there requires that I change the use. So how long does that take? How much does that cost? Those are all considerations. So without, this isn't like a full day class because that's easily how long we could talk about identifying a location. I thought what I would really focus in on are some of the demand drivers, and primarily demographic and income. And when I talk about demand drivers, what I'm really focusing on is when you think about a typical retail property, what they are doing is they're serving people that live kind of in close proximity. And so the number of people, their age, their income are all going to impact how much they spend, what type of retail stores they want to travel to. And you can kind of quickly, when I was in Toronto, I always go back to Toronto because it was just a trip I just did, but I was on Yonge Street. And I mean, the number of people walking up and down there, I walked into a Starbucks, and I've never seen a Starbucks that busy in my entire life. It was just unbelievable. And I mean, when you think about it, it's a great location. There's tons of population, daytime and nighttime. And so you can see why that Starbucks is probably paying, I mean, I don't know, because I don't do retail investing in Toronto, but I would say it's north of $100 a square foot, where, that might sound unbelievable, and maybe someone will comment below and tell me kind of what the numbers would be. But I have to think based on that location and the number of people that they could easily afford that, because you've got so much demand. Okay. So that is one quick way to start to think about demand. And the population was young. I mean, everyone in there was, they're buying their expensive frappuccinos, and, I'm sure that Starbucks does extremely well. So when you're assessing the demand, I'm going to break it down into kind of 3 key areas. So income, and what I mean by income is think about your purchasing power. So what is the household income in that area? What's the median income? And then what's the average size of the household? All this information you can research and find. Population, what are the number of households living in that area? So you look at Toronto, New York, really dense areas, Vancouver. I mean, you've got generally lots of high rises and very high density. Then you start getting into even Calgary, for example. It's less dense because we don't have the same barriers that constrain us. We can continue to expand out. Now, obviously, if you're in downtown, you've got higher density, which is generally why you see higher rental rates. And then last is demographics and consumer spending on certain types of retail. As kind of a rule of thumb, younger people with growing families have different needs than an older demographic. And this is going to drive the demand for different types of retail. So one other, consideration is disposable income is going to be impacted by the taxes of where you live. And so if you consider what's going on in, say, California right now, I don't invest there because, frankly, I see that state emptying out because it is expensive. I mean, it's a beautiful place. I love traveling to it. However, I can see why people that, businesses and people that are looking for jobs are starting to transition into, say, Texas, for example, because they're looking at their quality of life, their cost of living, lower taxes, and really at the end of the day, it's like, how much am I going to take home after I pay for my accommodations where I live, and how much the government is taking. So you really want to start to think about those factors, because that is what drives retail sales. And this is kind of a bonus concept that I thought I would just throw in here. And similar to following where the smart money is, there's a concept in retail which is the gravity concept, and it's really on how far will a consumer drive to a location. And probably the best way to think about this is large retail sites will pull more traffic from further away than a small site. And so depending on the type of locations you're looking at, whether you're looking to buy an existing or to develop, you want to start to think about how convenient is your location and how many, what's the competition in the area? I mean, if you're at point B and there's a power center with a tremendous variety of offerings that they can get let's say yours is 10,000 square feet and it's mainly fast food restaurants and a gas station. And then you've got this big power center that has a gas station and all the same kind of fast food, plus it's got a grocery store, plus it's got banks, plus. People are going to drive further to get to that power center because of the offerings than they will to yours. Now, there are outliers where people will, and this is where you see people driving 20 and 30 minutes to get to these locations. And it's IKEA's, it's a Costco's in Canada, it's a MEC, Mountain Equipment Co-op. It could be a Nordstrom's, and it might even be like a specialty place like a Crave Cupcakes, for example. Even though that's not going to draw lots of people, it does have that kind of impact in terms of people will drive extra distances to get to these specialty shops. So something to consider. I don't want to get too deep into the gravity concept, but it is a consideration. Okay, so how do you get started? What are the kind of three steps? Because we've talked about a lot, and I don't want to overwhelm you. Number one, what I would suggest is printing off a map and then drawing like a 3 to 10 mile radius, depending on where you live. And once you've got that map, what I want you to do is pick an asset class that you want to master. Is it multifamily? Is it industrial? Is it retail? Is it office? Whatever it is, pick it and then become the expert on that. And what you're going to start to do is, number 3, you're going to become aware of noticing what is going on. You're going to start looking at properties. You're going to start tracking them on your map, marking down, I like this one, I don't like this one. What's the access? What's the visibility? What's the vacancy? Who are my tenants? Are there big tenants going in here? Are there is the smart money coming into this area? Is it a corner site? Do I like the signage? Is it an out parcel that I can do something extra with? Does this site have extra land that I could put something more on it? Does it have lots of parking? Does it have too little parking? You're looking for problems that you can solve, because at the end of the day, that's where you're going to have the advantage to really push the value on that commercial property and get kind of that unfair investing advantage that you're really looking for. So a quick recap. The big idea today was talking about location. And because commercial real estate is imperfect, you want to master an area that's closest to you because that's going to give you your main competitive advantage. The main problems I see new investors making when it comes to finding properties is they really don't know where to start. They spend hours touring properties because they're not really sure why. They get overwhelmed and then it essentially leads to quitting. Um, I don't want you to either pick the wrong location or stop before you even get started because of that overwhelm. So ideally what you want to do is you want to get clear on the right property. You want to invest close to where you live so that you understand the market and you develop that confidence because it's a place that you understand and you're in it. Once you master your location and something becomes available, you're going to have the confidence to be able to pull the trigger. And that's really what you're looking for. So as it relates to the specifics of a location, we talked about access, we talked about parking, we talked about transportation, visibility, demographics, and homework for you if you're starting to look at retail properties. Get out a map, pick the type of property that you want to start investing in, make a list of all the properties, who's vacant, brokers' names, leasing, selling, owners, and you want to get familiar with the rental rates. When I'm looking at a property, I will go in quite often to tenants and I try to find who the owner is. And I ask them, how's business? What's going on? Are you busy? Were you busier last year? Are you busier now? And if I get into a really good conversation, I'll just ask them like, hey, how much does it cost to rent space in a location like this? Because number one, owners really like to either complain or brag. And so it's not hard to get them to have those conversations. I mean, I just went in when I was buying my Mac and I was just curious. I said, like, what's it cost to rent this place anyways? Because you got a really nice space and I'm curious. And he told me no problem. So, it's just one of those things that comes with experience and it is research that is extremely valuable. So, that's all I've got for today. I hope you enjoyed this kind of deep dive into location. And like I'd mentioned, if you're looking for the commercial real estate investing scorecard that I use, it's got about 30 variables on it that I use to evaluate commercial properties. If you'd like it, I'll have a link in the show notes, or you can go to www.clubsyndication.com/scorecard. That's it for today. Appreciate you tuning in. If you got any questions, by all means, you can email me. And if I get enough of the questions, I'll make sure that I put them into next week's show. Okay, bye for now.